Great to be here with all of you today. And we're going to be diving into a topic that is pretty much the number one concern for a lot of startup CEOs. And that is the topic of how do you get to sustainable, predictable, recurring enterprise revenue streams, whether from enterprise customers or partners. And we are seeing that startups are becoming a pretty commonplace component within enterprise IT portfolios. In fact, Sapphire Ventures just wrapped up an innovation indexing study recently where we found remarkably that CIOs were estimating that close to 10% of their IT budgets, by their estimate, were being consumed by products from venture-backed startups. But we also know that only a small sliver of VC-backed startups will get to the kind of repeatable revenue clip that is going to put them on the path to unicorn status. And what we have here today is a lineup of executives that frankly know the enterprise customer and go-to-market motion in a way that few other executives in our industry do. So we'll spend the next 20 minutes trying to shake them down for as many trade secrets on enterprise selling and partnering as we can. We have Sanjay Poonan, Chief Operating Officer of VMware, and as such responsible for all sales, marketing alliances. DJ Peony, President of SAP North America, driving sales strategy and operations across the entire region. And Monty Gray, Head of Corporate Development at Okta, driving all strategic growth initiatives, including M&A. And by the way, worth noting that Okta was not that long ago a startup itself. In fact, I think you guys were founded 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
And today, some 15 billion in market cap and counting, and an enterprise in your own right.
All of us at some point were not a startup.
That is correct.
We're a small startup.
I wanted to kick off by posing the fundamental question of how enterprise technology buyers view startups. And if it's okay, DJ, Sanjay, I'll start with the two of you first, because I think collectively you sort of represent some of the very largest cohorts of enterprise technology buyers across IT, lines of business, and across industries. Tell us a little bit about how your Global 2000 Fortune 500 customers view engagement with startups. How do they think about the greatest areas of customer value they're going to derive, and how do they think about risks? DJ, if we could start with you.
So first off, it's great to be here. So appreciate being up on stage with all of you. And I wish the audience that's watching online could see kind of the vibe in the room here and the vibe as we were walking around earlier today. But yeah, with SAP, I'm very fortunate that we have 150,000 customers here in North America. So each week I spend time in front of customers all over the country, in every single industry, just listening to some of their challenges, discussing opportunities that they might have out there in the marketplace. And a couple themes that I hear that I think are relevant for this audience is first and foremost talent management. These companies are looking at how do we acquire and how do we retain the most talented people in the industry so that we can become the employer of choice in our industry. And so for those of you who are out there, whether you have 3 people in your company, whether you have 300 people in your company, talent management should absolutely have a seat at the table as a strategic priority of your organization. I also see companies looking at their brand growth, and their brand, protecting their brand. If you think about how long it takes for you to build a positive brand, to build that experience with your customers, and it could be gone like that. We live in an experience economy, right? So if there's a negative experience that someone might have with your brand, that could be very detrimental, and you could be digging out of that for a long time. So these are issues that our customers are looking for companies like VMware and like SAP to solve for them. They are also looking at startups to help solve some of these issues and some of these challenges. And I think the value that the startups are providing is just really that fresh outside-in perspective that they might not have where their traditional organizational structures, their comp plans, their silos, their just way of doing things that they've always done encumbers their ability to innovate a little bit. And so they look at startups to help them with that. And I see the engagements being very pointed. They're very pointed around business outcomes, less about kind of the flashy technology and more about here's a strategic priority that we have. Here's a business outcome that we're looking for. Can you help solve that? So they'll bring startups in for very specific use cases to talk through how can that help me in this area. So they want you to be very good at something and not just average at a lot of things. And that's how you build an enterprise foundation. That's how you build enterprise products. That's how SAP got started when we started with financials. And we went to customer A and B and C and D. We did that very well. And then we came back with logistics and supply chain. So they're looking for you to be very good at something and to be able to come in and prove your technology out in a limited use case environment.
Thanks, DJ. It's actually sort of interesting. We were all ex-SAP people at some point.
That's right.
So that's the common thread here. I just add a few things to what DJ is. I think as all of us, as we get to be bigger companies, VMware is a little over 10 billion. SAP is what, 30 plus billion. Okta will probably be billion pretty soon. The danger we all face as bigger companies is that we will probably get scale understood pretty well. But the danger that we have is we will miss speed. And everything in life and technology is about combining speed and scale. And you folks who are startups get the speed part pretty well. And obviously you'll come to us to learn about scale, or as you grow bigger, you'll understand scale. And if you can be a elephant and a cheetah in one, where you get the scale and speed together, that's the magic. So I spend a lot of my time, especially as we've sought to bring innovation into our company. And the thing that's been special about VMware, and the same thing when I was at SAP that I sought to do there, was innovate in new areas that were outside the core of what you're known for. And so at SAP, a lot of my time there was we were known for ERP, and I was helping the company get into analytics. Here at VMware, we're known for virtualization, but there's so much more than just server virtualization that companies care about, and now we've become a de facto cloud infrastructure company. And you do that because you're learning from other companies like you who get the innovation and speed part. And you can't just acquire all of them. So if you come to VMworld, one of our big conferences, we probably have about 100,000 people who come to all of our VMworld conferences across the world, and maybe 1 million people who watch it. We proliferate a large number of startups in that community who've on their own become successful companies. We may acquire a few of them, but we seek to really build a platform that can make a very vibrant ecosystem of startups. And it's largely because our customers ask us to go and partner with a few of these folks who are doing something very specialized for them. So a CIO might have a relationship with a SAP or a VMware or a few others that are the big strategic vendors, but they want to have a handful of really, really creative startups that they're also working with. Many of these CIOs of banks have, Silicon Valley visits where they come and meet some of the vendors here, but in addition to the big vendors, they're also meeting startups. And it's really important for us big companies to have those startups on our radar because they become the future, VMware and SAPs or Oktas. So me personally, what I do, I try to spend 1 day a week. It might be a Friday, it might be, depending on what it is, meeting at least, 1 or 2 startups and getting to know their CEOs and their teams. In many cases, there's something I can learn from their CEO about what they're doing that's different from what VMware does at scale. And it's usually something about speed. So just last week, without naming the company, because I don't want to put the company on the spot, I found something really interesting about the way they're doing demand generation and marketing that I would love our CMO and our marketing team to just learn from. And I asked the CEO, would you mind if we come to your offices and you do a lecture to us on how you're doing creative next-gen marketing? That's just a way by which all of a sudden this startup now is incredibly special. They've got the time of us spending time. So if you have that growth mindset, and by the way, that's how our customers think too. They're the customers who are successful, the CIOs and IT leaders are successful, they've got that growth mindset where they're not satisfied with the status quo. Okay, you understand this, but you don't understand these things. And many of you folks who are successful entrepreneurs have that in your DNA, and that's the reason I'm here at this conference. There's things I want to learn from you guys.
Monty, what are some of the most common recurring mistakes that you see startups make when they are pitching their innovation message, either to end customers or to potential partners like you guys?
Yeah, I think DJ made a good point here about stay focused, right? So stay focused on your value proposition that you might have. One common mistake that we see is you may have an incredible technical innovation or good vision, but when you're talking to a customer or a partner and think about their customers, your partner's customers, distill that use case and that value proposition to something that matters to them versus like you can do everything else out there, right? And what I often see is companies try to present themselves as they would to an investor versus what they would to a customer. And so practice that elevation, hone that thesis. And oftentimes with a startup, they're probably still figuring out product market fit. So at least have a thesis and test it with your customers, test it with your partners, but be open, but stay focused.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point there. Some of the mistakes that I see are when salespeople and sales organizations will go out and they will miss providing a point of view that is tailored to a business outcome. They get very focused on, hey, we got some really cool technology, and we have this is customer A, customer B likes it. Let's just go right in here, and they got the tunnel vision on I'm going to demo this. I'm going to go feature function, and so they lose kind of the bigger picture of what is the ultimate outcome, what is the business value, and how do we work backwards from the strategic priority, that this is going to solve for that organization, as opposed to just focusing on a feature and function. I think that's kind of one of the big mistakes and the big misses sometimes that I see with startups.
I wanted to touch briefly on the topic of incumbents, because you can't really talk about a startup's journey from inception into the enterprise customer base without talking about some of the pre-existing players they're going to encounter along the way. And specifically when you're talking about a pre-established domain of spending, a pre-established sort of technology category, you're going to have a number of pre-existing players that often have long-standing relationships with the customer and all kinds of other advantages. So, Sanjay, if you could just sort of share any one or two sort of pieces of advice that you might give to a startup CEO that is going into a domain that already is populated by incumbents, how should they think about sort of navigating their journey and finding a way to really hold their own relative to sort of deeply established players?
I think the amazing story of TechCrunch is that it's sort of a David and Goliath, again and again and again and again. I mean, SAP was that at some point, 45 years ago when Hasso started the company and was toppling incumbents that should have built SAP, maybe IBM. And they came out of IBM and did that. When Diane Green and her husband and a few people started VMware, nobody thought that server virtualization was possible in x86, and they invented it out of Stanford. And from that was born what's today one of the fastest growing companies to 10 billion. So I think you have to have, first off, an incredible David and Goliath mindset that you're going to topple a Goliath. I mean, it doesn't matter that you are so much smaller than them, but you have something about what you built that's either from and it has to be a technology, it can't be just a go-to-market, that is disruptively innovative, and that the incumbent will always have, again, like I described earlier, will have scale but won't have speed. And if you have something that's disruptively innovative, you can move fast. I think Okta's proven that pretty well recently in terms of their fighting incumbents. And in some senses, VMware has, over the course of time, even as we've gotten bigger, had to navigate among other bigger incumbents that have gotten. And I'll give you an example. In the early days of VMware, the company that should have probably obliterated us in the early days was Microsoft, because the bulk of our virtualization proposition was on Windows servers. But there was one thing VMware did really well, which was they covered Linux. Okay? And for a long time, Microsoft just denied that Linux existed. This is now 20 years ago. And that build a better product and just cover heterogeneity became the proposition that in the early days. I'm sure Diane would say there's a lot more than what VMware, but in the early days, just watching from the outside in, they did that really well. And at some point in time, Microsoft admitted Linux existed. But by that point in time, VMware was on the map. So it's something as small as that put us on the map, and I see startups doing that again, and they just hone in on that David versus Goliath mindset, and then it starts to pop, and then 50, 100, 250, 500 million, and once you get to $1 billion you've created, then you've got to watch that the next startup's not trying to come in to disrupt you.
I wanted to switch gears briefly to talk about what the startup ecosystem means to your individual companies and your own innovation strategies. And I think, Sanjay, you touched on what that sort of engagement looks like for VMware earlier on. But Monty, DJ, if you could just talk a little bit about what role startups play in SAP and Okta's innovation strategies going forward.
Sure. So for Okta, our company's vision, or our mission, is to enable any company to use any technology. That's a broad charter, and so there's plenty of room for innovation there. So if you think about Okta, at the Okta Integration Network, we have 6,500 integrations, and that can evolve into, if you think about the funnel of engagement you can have with a company like Okta, that evolves into maybe co-marketing, to an advanced API to API integration, all the way down to maybe some commercial relationship for a resale. We also have an investment fund to help along that journey, and in the odd situation, we could also acquire you. I think Okta's still a young company, up and coming, 10-year anniversary. We've done 5 acquisitions so far, and those have all resulted in major product lines for the company. So I think there's a broad surface area to engage with if you're a startup, and I think the key piece of advice I would give is understand where you fit in a large partner's journey, like what their strategy is and what their philosophy is, and then just have that thesis and just work with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, Monty, you said it very nicely there. I mean, at SAP, and I like Sanjay, what you said earlier, you can't acquire everybody, and so you have to have this mentality of working with partners out in the ecosystem, because that's what our customers want us to do. They don't want us to be closed loop. They want us to provide our offerings so that other companies can plug their offerings into ours. And so we realize that, and so very much like Okta, we'll partner with organizations where we see there is a particular niche or fit that fits very complementary into our product line that may not be on our product roadmap, that we can provide that value to a customer and plugging that into our overall environment. And in some cases, we'll make some acquisitions. But obviously, SAP's acquired some pretty big companies over the past few years. We're mostly doing some tuck-in acquisitions now. I don't think we're going to be doing some major acquisitions. We could not pass up the opportunity for Qualtrics and what that can do and how that touches every single product area, the experience management of this, and how that resonates out there in the marketplace. And so we'll look to partner. We'll look for resell. We have about 25 companies that we resell. So if you think about how your product might fit into the strategy, a complementary strategy to SAP, instant sales force of over 1,000 people here in North America that will be selling those products. So huge revenue gain, huge revenue boost for that organization, and huge value we can provide our customers by integrating them into our portfolio.
Shruti, let me just add one other thing which I would add to the sort of incumbent, which doesn't quite fit the David and Goliath narrative, but I think it's important for you startups. One way to fight the incumbent is just to fight them. That's the David and Goliath part. The other part is to partner with them and join them. Okay, because even at our stage, we're a $10 billion company. I described us as in the land of other big incumbents. So who is the threat to VMware now, today at our stage? It's the big public clouds, Amazon, Azure, Google, Alibaba, whoever have you. And I think it was a seminal point for us 3 years ago where we felt for us to turn that incumbent into a friend, we needed to really strategically go and partner with them and not view them as the enemy. And to the extent that you can actually make that incumbent, sometimes it's not possible, you just got to fight them. That's David versus Goliath. But sometimes there's this sort of, I described a Berlin Wall moment where the US and Soviet Union get together in 1987. That's a big, and when we did that, we found all of a sudden the narrative that changed for us was so fundamentally different. We've become an arms broker to all of the public clouds, and that's catapulted the VMware story to a huge different league. We've done the same thing recently in terms of what we're doing with containers and leveraging this incredible movement called Kubernetes, and we just last week announced our intent to buy Pivotal and become a major force there. So I think the other lesson I would share with you is to the extent that you could become part of, Bill Joy had this line, which I always like, which is, listen, when you see a parade happening, go grab a baton and be at the front of that parade. Okay, don't try to fight the parade because it's happening. Open source is a good example of that. If you are a startup, so at the beginning of that, and you can join a parade or make the incumbent join you, you get even 10 times the impact that you could have just on your own.
Partnerships between venture-backed startups and large tech giants do have a somewhat mixed track record in the sense that they can consume a lot of resources from the startup side and sometimes deliver sustainable top-line growth and sometimes don't. Sanjay, in just a few words, if you could call out the key success ingredients or patterns that startup CEOs should look for when they're trying to figure out whether to invest resources in pursuing an alliance with a tech giant, what might be a few words of advice there?
Just very quickly, because we've seen a number of successful startups we've acquired, as have these folks. I would say the CEOs and their teams that we like are folks who are just, they've got grit, and in their sense, they just are mini Steve Jobs. They think they're going to conquer the world. And even if their business isn't as big as an iPhone, they have that mindset. They understand product and they understand go-to-market very well, and then they're constantly, ruthlessly focused on their people, hiring, recruiting, retaining, and those qualities ultimately, if we can scale them, we actually like keeping those people because they could run bigger businesses for us. So we often try to keep CEOs of companies we acquire for as long as we can. Sometimes they get the bug and they want to go do it again, unfortunately. But I think a general manager at a bigger company is a startup that's a person who's really done well at a startup as a CEO and then can build a big business. I think the best general managers in our business, whether I saw them at SAP or at VMware, were people who at some point in time were a startup CEO.
Just in a couple of words each, which emerging technology in the enterprise are you most excited about that you believe is sort of an area of unmet demand where startups should be delivering innovation?
Sure. I think from the identity standpoint, the multi-cloud trend right now is just in the early innings, and that's going to shift the control plane for a variety of different offerings, whether it's security, whether it's SaaS management, and there's a ton of innovation happening there. The role of data and machine learning in that one as well.
I'd have to go with experience management. I mean, it's a $40 billion industry. Being able to provide your customers a better experience for their customers and how you can plug into that. I mean, augmented reality, these are hot things that are going to be in the enterprise soon.
I'm excited about a lot of things. The ones I'm probably most recently excited about, I mentioned two. One is Kubernetes and containers, and the other is security. I think both industries are going to rapidly be changed. I look forward to startups like you who are innovating in those two areas. I think there's a rich set of innovation on both containers and security that the world needs.
Terrific. I think that's a wrap. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.